Okay. Yeah. Is that, yeah, that started recording. Okay, great. Yeah, we're gonna pass this on obviously to Claire, because Claire's going to co-chair this one, and I think I'm going to be loitering in the background doing some Slido polls and trying to make the tech work, which will probably be a fail, but I'll give it a go anyway.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Gleeson. So I work for Keyring. We're a charity and a provider organisation. We work across 27 local authorities across England and Wales. And since 1990, we've been supporting people to live in their own homes and creating networks of support that are rooted in communities. So being here today feels quite apt, really. I'll pass on to Stefan.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. So I'm Stefan. I work for CQC as one of the senior specialists for people with a learning disability and autistic people. And I'm here because I had a chat with Chris, who told me about your group. So I'm here today to listen to you and learn from you. And I'll pass over to Victoria.
Thanks, Stefan. I'm Victoria Caruana, so I'm working with the Royal Borough of Greenwich at the moment. I'm leading on the market shaping and market development work. And part of that is obviously including the ISF development. And I will pass on to Kate Garner, please.
Thanks, Victoria. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Garner, and I'm currently working with Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, developing a personalisation programme, which also includes ISFs and some other good things. And I'll pass over, put my glasses back on, I'll pass over to Zoe.
Finally made it. We was trying to join on Google Meet and not Teams, so we're here now. So I'm Zoe Titchener. I'm a commissioning officer with Nottingham City Council. Currently reviewing our extra care provision as well as our day services. And I'll pass over to Amy Groom.
Hi, I'm Amy Groom. I'm a commissioning officer at Nottingham City Council, and we're coming to look at our home care model soon, so getting involved with that. And I'll pass over to Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Coltman. I'm also a commissioner at Nottingham City Council, working on the review of our extra care services, and recently been working on our market position statement. Is there anyone else that hasn't been, because I joined late?
Fiona, I think we've not heard from Fiona yet.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Plymouth City Council. I commission services and support for people, and yeah, looking to see what's happening and how we can change things in Plymouth. Thank you.
Got Mary.
Is it Victoria?
Oh, we've had Victoria. Got Mary.
Hi everyone, I'm Mary. I'm from Sheffield City Council. I'm leading on an improvement programme around personalisation and direct payments, and we're really keen to move along with our individual service funds and our generic offer around everything community based and people directing their own support. So I'm really interested just to gain a network of other like-minded people and to try and do things better here. David.
Morning, everyone. Dave Drayton Green. I'm the Direct Payment Service Manager for Wolverhampton City Council. I've been to all sorts of meetings that Chris organises, and he seems to invite me to everything and anything that he arranges. They're always really, really good, always really worth attending. I suppose from Wolverhampton perspective, we've done a lot of work around direct payments, personal health budgets and individual service funds. So I guess Chris seems to think I'm fairly useful sometimes. Thank you.
And Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Kirkpatrick. I'm also from Keyring. Claire's given a great account of what Keyring's about, and I think the only thing I can add is it was good to hear, Simon, about the membership, the people joining from South Korea, and we've had a couple of visits from people to South Korea, meeting members and finding out a bit about Keyring. So it's lovely to see how things move on and progress.
Adam. Adam still with us?
I think he had to go and take a call,
Oh,
Claire.
you gone? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's Adam Grazy from North Yorkshire. Adam, yeah. So that's the round of introduction, and I guess just to add a little bit further, was just to explain why Keyring is here and supporting the network. As Chris said, yeah, I'm supporting Simon as the co-chair because Keyring are a sponsor of the self-directed support network. And so through my work as the personalisation lead at Keyring, I'm a member of the self-directed support provider network, which has been meeting for the last couple of years. I know there's a commissioner network as well, and hopefully you feel the same as I do about the provider network, that it's a really great forum to connect with the work that self-directed futures are doing, other providers, or for yourselves, commissioners. So work that people are doing around personalisation and using that space to really share ideas and best practice and skills and resources, all of which can enable change. So when Chris asked Keyring if we'd like to support this network, it was an easy decision, really. It was an obvious yes. We did. So hopefully we can bring some insight to the group, as Keyring's had 33 years of experience of creating networks that are rooted in neighbourhoods, whereby the network model recognises that connection and skill sharing and having a community of support is really key to building independence of people. And likewise, I think as Keyring as an organisation, we know that as connection and skill sharing and communities of support are really key to building our future and supporting a social care system that demands more for people's lives. So I think even after all this time, Keyring are still considered as working innovatively, but what we do isn't rocket science, but the idea of the membership model that often challenges the thinking of local authorities, especially if there's a focus there on time and task. So I think in terms of like being here today and this kind of network about looking at innovative models of neighbourhood care, I think it's a really great opportunity for us all to share what works and what doesn't, and hear about new and different approaches, whether that's locally and as Simon was talking, nationally and globally. And just using this time as well to maybe challenge each other to think differently. So being part of this forum and network for Keyring feels absolutely the right place for us to be and support. So thanks for inviting us, Chris and Simon. So I'll hand over to Simon because he's going to tell you a little bit about the history and the origins of neighbourhood care before we go into some group discussions. So it will be quite interactive after that bit. So over to you, Simon.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm dreaded slides, but I've got all these slides, so I feel like I need to share them. I do have a friend who tells me just talk, Simon, just talk. But I think today I am going to use my slides. So can everybody see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And just on what Claire was saying, interestingly, I was chatting to two academics locally in Sheffield who are studying ISFs at the moment, and they were singing the praises of Keyring. And we had a conversation about the use of ISFs as a mechanism to drive forward neighbourhood care. And they didn't realise how old Keyring was, really. Or I was saying how I remember when Carl Pohl created Keyring and how inspiring it was. But in many respects, it was an innovative model that was really innovative for the now, for the future that's emerging now. It's amazing, and the testimony to the work that Karen and Claire and colleagues have done, that Keyring has actually survived and flourished in a kind of commissioning environment, which is often hostile. So the kind of basic principles that I think Keyring are about, which are very innovative but common sense as well, as Claire says. And that is a good example of what I want to talk about. And Claire and Chris have kind of given me half an hour. I'll try and keep it easily underneath that. So I think we're at a kind of interesting point of change. And so this is the first event of this kind of commissioning group exploring innovative models of neighbourhood care, the first for SDS Network England. I suppose I think we're actually at a kind of big period of change at the moment. Over the last 3 or 4 years, Citizen Network has been running a program called It's Our Community, which has been a learning program to think about what the real future of social care should look like. And without a doubt, the overwhelming theme of challenge and desire has been to get things much, much more local. And that's what I mean by a neighbourhood in this context. Obviously, in a rural context, that could be something quite different, like a village or a hamlet. But in an urban context, neighbourhood is probably the right kind of word for us. Why are we having this conversation? Maybe we should have always been talking about this. And in many countries, the kind of centralisation of social care that we've got used to in England didn't really take place. So we've gone further, I would argue, in the wrong direction in many places. But there has been a general global trend to centralise, to regulate. But what we've seen, I think, at the moment, and why this change is starting to emerge, is obviously the public spending crisis. We've had 14 years of austerity, and even with the prospect of a change of government, nobody's really expecting any fundamental change to public finances. But we've got a kind of crisis in the model of regulation and control. Well, I was going to say sadly, it's not sad. I'm 59 years old, but my whole career has been during the time that's been dominated by the kind of the Purchaser Provider split, the NHS Procurement Act, or NHS and Community Care Act of 1992. The kind of model, when I was learning about these things, I was at the King's Fund in 1989, 88, 89, and those people were actually leading this change in thinking that they saw as a good thing. This split between purchasers and providers, this drawing up of power into commissioning arrangements that would be rational, logical, would drive forward innovation, the use of markets for public good. And as I said to the academics I was talking to yesterday, you know, if you now ask the question, well, where's the evidence any of this worked? You can't find any. There is no evidence that the contracting mechanisms that really dominated public service delivery from the kind of early 90s onwards have delivered the changes that were promised, or even delivered the efficiencies that they're meant to deliver. And we've got other problems as well. I mean, there's a severe problem of morale in public services. Many doctors, for instance, we recently published a paper by some very senior consultants actually arguing to the Labour Party that the Labour Party needed to embrace community much more. The doctors did not want to be operating in bigger and bigger bureaucracies. So if that's true for doctors who are perhaps in a kind of peak profession, how true it is for social workers, for district nurses, that so often they're working in systems that are actually taking them away from relationships with ordinary people. Then we have a huge problem that's increasingly being drawn attention to by the United Nations, pointing out that the care system is basically deeply unfair to women. That what we're in a situation where unpaid care is the normal form of care, and it's normally provided by women, and paid care is normally provided by women, and usually at the bottom of the pay scale of the economy. And then when you add in the pressures we create for those women, whether they're working or unpaid, by care systems that are very distant from their neighbourhoods, from their communities, from their families, we further the stresses and strains on people. But more positively, we've seen all sorts of really good things emerge. We've seen peer support emerge. We've seen the example of Keyring, which is a kind of early model of organised peer support that's been so effective. We saw the COVID crisis and mutual aid that emerged in neighbourhoods.
Thanks for that, mate. Cheers.
Hi there.
Cheers.
And we've seen increasing efforts to organise more kind of democratic reform at a neighbourhood level. And I think at a deeper level, people are starting to recognise that the kind of mechanical approach to society that we see in so much of the kind of public policy thinking and the consumerist approach is now out of date. So the people are becoming more sensitive to the idea that we need to grow ecosystems, that we need to think in terms of regeneration. And crudely, I think we're entering a kind of the end of a 40-year cycle of public policy. So in a sense, quite often what happens is that ideas just run out of steam. And I think the ideas that have dominated public policy have run out of steam. This is a map. The data reflects just my city of Sheffield, but similar data could be in different places. We developed this during COVID to kind of help communities think about how they self-organise to respond to the crisis. I won't go through it in detail. The point is that the crisis showed both the capacity of neighbourhoods, but also the need to think very, very differently about neighbourhoods, to organise very differently. And I think that's going to be one of the central themes of the kind of next few years as we think about this. At a deeper level, you can think about this as rethinking what's at stake in institutionalisation. What drives institutionalisation? In a sense, institutions are the response to a crisis that's emerged out of the failures at higher levels, further uphill. That, you know, the reason people are in services is really because of failures further uphill, and the fact that then some of those services start to eject people and send people into institutional environments is a function of their failure. But beyond that, we've got to think about the citizens and what citizen responsibilities exist, what family structures exist, what community structures exist, what are the underlying systems of social justice. I mean, at the moment, one of the major drivers for kids going into care is extreme poverty in the UK. Families under immense stress, often both parents working, and then being found to be deemed to be incapable parents, and their children going into private residential care. And all of this sits on top of the kind of natural question of our relationship with nature and the disharmony that currently exists. So all of these things start to drive the changes we see. So the assumption that certainly me and others have been trying to pursue, the kind of basic hypothesis, is that the neighbourhood should be a central function of future policy thinking and action, actually across many fronts, not just care. But care is an area where the value of neighbourhoods could be so much greater than it currently is. And this is a model I use to try and help people think about this. It's a kind of more organic model. If you do think about a functioning community as something that actually enables people to step up into citizenship, supports people, welcomes people, gives people opportunities, then the neighbourhood is the kind of best starting place. It doesn't mean that neighbourhoods are the only things we need. So this slide is also trying to draw attention to the kind of bedrocks that sit underneath the neighbourhood. So we do still need businesses, voluntary sector, different organisations, what we call civil society. We need community services, we need general practice, we need social work, local area coordinators, other forms of organised service at a community level. We need good public services. We're not going to organise brain surgery at a neighbourhood level. We need good local government. We need much greater attention, I would argue, to social and economic justice. And we need a kind of constitutional settlement upon which all this sits. I know I'm covering a lot of ground very quickly here, but really I just want to get this sense that we're not talking about a kind of simplistic choice of only this, some kind of primitive, strip everything away and go back to neighbourhoods, everything will be all right. No, that's not true. But what we've tended to do is really ignore the neighbourhood in public policy making. In Sheffield, and Mary will know this very well, Sheffield people know that they live in a neighbourhood. Most people can name the neighbourhood they live in, and those names are pretty consistent. But there's no actual acknowledgement at the moment of the existence of these neighbourhoods in the civic structures of Sheffield. And so we just completed a citizen-led mapping of neighbourhoods in Sheffield. And this is, I think, is quite exciting. We've now identified a map of 147 different neighbourhoods in Sheffield. And the reason we're doing that is to actually, not just for the sake of having a map of the neighbourhoods, but it's to start getting people in Sheffield organising differently on many different dimensions, working in greater harmony and partnership with statutory services and the council to bring about the social changes we need. This very complicated picture, which I'm going to jump into little elements of it, is my way of trying to think about how do we start to make the changes we need to make. So I apologise for this complex picture. I'm always trying to find a simpler way of doing things, but sometimes you have to start with the complexity that you need and then work from there. And this is based around the Citizen Network Agora. So Citizen Network thinks about how we can promote people as citizens, and the Agora was the structure, actually sacred public space in Greek cities, particularly Athens, where lots of different things happened. It's quite interesting. In English, we often translate the word agora into a market, and the agora certainly contained a market. So it did include a place where people bought things and sold things, and that's represented in the kind of bottom quadrant of this. So the ancient agora included the market, but it wasn't the biggest thing in the space of the agora. And importantly, nobody could buy any of the land in the agora. So what the Athenians understood is it's really important for citizens to have shared public space where they could meet, connect, and organise. And so that's what an agora is. And I'll jump through some of these things, but one of the interesting things that happens if you think about neighbourhoods is it changes the scale of lots of things. So I think that number might be slightly wrong when I was working with a slightly lower number of neighbourhoods than we've got, Mary, but let's say 4,000 is kind of quite a standard in the people like Cormac Russell who work in the field of community development would say a good size for a neighbourhood from the evidence we've got is about 4,000 people. And if about 3% of the population are entitled to social care, that means that out of those 4,000 or so people, there's about 125 people who've got significant social care needs. Now, that's not to forget that there might be people with other significant health needs who that figure doesn't include. But the other thing we know from the work that we've done with Barnsley and Doncaster is that if the community actually itself was organised to provide peer support, it in equivalency terms would be producing about £10 million worth of peer support. This is one of the things that is really missing from our understanding of social care, is the value of all the things that people do, not just carers doing, but neighbours and citizens supporting each other. So that's the kind of basic dimensions. And obviously one of the things that really would stand out for many of you, I think, is that if you've got 125 people in a neighbourhood, then it may be much harder to start thinking about everybody in their silos. You know, how many, there will be a few of those people will be people with learning disabilities. A few of those people will be people with physical disabilities. Quite a lot of those people, but not half of them, I would reckon. This is including children as well, would be older people. And then there'll be children and families and people with chronic illness and people with mental health problems inside what's really quite a modest number of people. So that raises questions about whether actually, as we start to move towards neighbourhood care, do we start to think differently about disability? Do we start to move away from professional definitions of the differences between people in some way? Not abandoning them, maybe. I'm not sure that would be good, but certainly thinking differently about what role they play. Obviously, it's really important to pay attention to the values that we apply to any change. So these values reflect the values of Citizen Network, and they're about inclusion and they're about citizenship. But they're also talking about everyone having a gift. I think one of the key things that we have to remember in this kind of work is that it's about recognizing capacity in everyone. And it's also about recognizing a principle that we shouldn't be, as a neighbourhood, exporting people. And by that, I mean the actual standard practice at the moment, if we think about it, most social care funding is spent on residential care outside people's own neighbourhoods. So that means that the primary action of social care is actually to currently export people from their neighbourhoods and to export the money that would have been spent in that neighbourhood on those people to somewhere else. And as we know, often that's also private businesses, some of whom have bank accounts in the Caribbean. So in terms of regenerative practice, what we're doing is actually stripping money away. The precious little money we have for social care, a lot of it is kind of leaving the local economy rather than supporting the local economy. This way of thinking also is linked to getting the different ideas about how democracy can work and how people start to organise. One of the most inspiring things I've learnt about over the last few years are the neighbourhood parliaments in southern India. These neighbourhood parliaments include millions of people, literally. And when we talk about a neighbourhood parliament, they're talking about everybody in a community. And I mean everybody, children, young people, adults, all having roles in their community life. So you would have, like, children would have kind of a ministry of fun, and they'd appoint one of their peers to lead on organising activities in the street. The families would end up taking on leadership around different roles at a street level, and then at a kind of neighbourhood and village level, and then federating upwards. I know this feels like very distant from the reality we're in. But actually, we started to see some of these kind of patterns emerge during COVID, and they're patterns that we can encourage, that enable people to see that they are valued. Often what people struggle with is they're not confident that they have a role to play in the community. So actually, in a way, democracy isn't, as much as anything, is about saying everybody does have a valuable role to play, and we'll create the roles that we need so that we can take care of each other and take care of the community we live in. What this also means is that when we think about neighbourhoods, and this is, I think, a very important point for commissioners and leaders in local government to think about, is that we're not talking about, say in Sheffield, 147 separate empires, all just disconnected, doing their own thing in their own way. What's fantastic about this kind of thinking is you can think about the neighbourhoods in a place as actually kind of networkable themselves. You can also think about the kind of skills and abilities that we want to invest in neighbourhoods as networkable. So as well as people who will care about their place, most of us also care about something. My friend David is a painter. He cares about painting for himself, but he also needs opportunities to link up with other painters across Sheffield. So there's a community of painters that's horizontal across Sheffield. But how wonderful it would be if we started to think about how does that community then bring to life great painting in every single one of the neighbourhoods of Sheffield, creating opportunities for learning, creating opportunities for selling and showing art. It's perfectly possible because in those communities of 4,000 people, there will be other great artists, there'll be other people who love painting. But we don't yet organise in a way that encourages these kind of cross connections. One of the things that I think we'll start to see to make this happen is also kind of creating opportunities for creativity. One of the ways functioning neighbourhoods do this is to create patterns, times when people eat together, festivals, markets, parties, projects, excuse me. So again, these are kind of human day-to-day things, but they become very important opportunities for people to find meaning, for people to meet, for people to connect, to build resilience across the community. And also, we need to share information and target information on neighbourhood level. I mentioned the mapping work that we've been doing in Sheffield recently. The outcome of that now means that we have not only a map of the neighbourhoods of Sheffield, but we have a map for each neighbourhood in Sheffield. So in the next few months, we're going to be working with local people in neighbourhoods to help them to enrich their understanding of their own map. And of course, this relates to things that friends like the founder of Keyring, Carl Pole, used to talk about many years ago, about the importance of community mapping, asset mapping. Well, think about doing that collectively using real maps. So we're actually doing that as a collective act. And this is not just enabling us to see what we've got, but also to spot problems that we need to tackle, opportunities that we might be missing out on. I think one of the big challenges for the future, certainly in Sheffield, but it's probably true elsewhere, is how public buildings are going to start to be reused and private buildings that are no longer fit for purpose. As the commercial markets have changed, as shopping has changed, as the economy has changed, what we've seen is a lot of buildings actually not have a good way forward for their future. Yet when you look at the carbon costs of new building, they seem far too great. What we really need to be doing is using the existing buildings that we have and starting to open some of these up for community and citizen action. When you look at the neighbourhood through the lens of the social care budget, then again, this is my kind of rough and ready estimates. Well, then you've got about £2 to £3 million in a neighbourhood nominally that should come from social care. Now, most of that is currently being lost through exporting people into residential care. So one of the major challenges we have is to stop that practice and bring the money and the people back into neighbourhood life. We know that one of the best ways to do that is through the use of ISFs, through the use of personal budgets connected to people, through the use of creative organisational support using local neighbourhood relationships. That's the kind of thing that Keyring is naturally organised to deliver, but there are also other ways we can encourage that kind of thinking, and there'll be different people with different support needs who might need different kinds of solutions. But all of that could be organised actually at a neighbourhood level to keep the resources at a neighbourhood level. In fact, I think Leeds has been using ISFs at a kind of neighbourhood level for several years. It was the model that we described in the ISF guidance based on their practice there. And we can think about this whole kind of economy as a central resource that we're trying to bring to life at a neighbourhood level. Keep money local, get spending local, local jobs, local enterprise, local entrepreneurship. And we can think about how public services might reorganise at a neighbourhood level. This is very challenging for folk because the tendency is to think that all the efficiencies come from going in the other way. But look at Birdsong, look at the principles of self-management. Interestingly, neighbourhoods relate very well, I think, to primary schools. There's 140 primary schools in Sheffield, so I don't think it's an accident that there are 147 neighbourhoods. And maybe we should be thinking much more about treating primary schools as a great anchor organisation, thinking about connecting very young people and families also to older people. In Finland, the residential care they have is usually connected to the local primary school, and actually older people and young kids eat together. Now that seems to me a much more attractive, if we do need residential care, shouldn't it be like that? Keeping people connected, keeping the generations connected, keeping people in their own community. But look at some of the other professional resources. These are my calculations based on national data and then averaged down by the size of neighbourhoods. I don't think any neighbourhood I know feels like it's got 10 social workers. Social workers feel a very long distance away from neighbourhoods. But imagine if those figures are even half right, imagine actually having social workers in the neighbourhood whose work is to prevent crisis and to support people to come up with solutions locally. Seems to me the kind of caseload crisis we have would be very different if people were in this kind of situation. And think about the other things that we could bring locally, like the work programme, which is a kind of highly wasteful approach to supporting people into employment, largely just benefiting private corporations. Imagine that money brought back into neighbourhoods to support young people to build careers, to learn stuff. That's equivalent to nearly £250,000 per neighbourhood. So these are some of the things I think we need to be thinking about: growing peer support, supporting neighbourhood democracy, embracing personal budgets properly and the underlying human rights, thinking about public services as being more self-managing, moving away from procurement and tendering towards the proper use of ISFs in every neighbourhood. I would argue, again, controversially, that when you move into this way of working, that the distinction between adult and children's social care starts to look very weak indeed. We should be trying to end means testing for social care, which doesn't help any of this. Reward inclusion and local solutions. This is going to be one of the key issues, I think. If neighbourhoods see the incentive to keep people locally, then it'll be much easier to make this work. If, in a sense, neighbourhoods are punished for exporting people, then it will be much easier to make this work. We need to start making much more explicit what's happening to the money, because at the moment, the kind of process by which people are still being placed in institutional services is the costs of that, and I mean the human costs primarily, are not being understood by the communities that people come from. We need to think about social justice much more seriously and work out, as the SDS Network England is showing and demonstrating, how to learn together through network learning. Hey, I think I did that in 29 minutes. I recognise, I apologise, I kind of probably crammed a bit too much in there, but anyway, we've got all the time in the world to figure out what all of this means. And I don't know if Claire, how do you want to take forward the next section?
I think we were going to go into a group discussion, weren't we, just to think about a few questions around kind of like what helps or hinders neighbourhood care today, where people are working, and what good examples should we maybe encouraging, and what obstacles do we need to move and get out of the way so we can get on with this. So I think we were just thinking about doing that in a group discussion. Chris was going to open up the Slido, so can people comment on that themselves as well as kind of chipping in on the Slido, Chris?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
let's just see if we've got the technology, shall we? Right, in theory, this is live. So if people just go to that, if you know how to use QR codes, then obviously that's one way in. Otherwise, if you go to slido.com and put that number in, it's just a free-form word cloud, so people can just chuck stuff in there, and I guess we can just talk about it as stuff pops up as well, if people are happy to do that.
Got loads of comments coming through now then. So what do we think helps neighbourhood care grow? So good advice. Going to move around this, isn't it? Involving people, support to organise, willingness to engage, accessibility, affluence, citizen choice, local support, reciprocity, local pride, shared goals, removal of barriers, clear expectations, something for everyone, inclusivity, understanding of each other, listening, inclusion, personal budgets, involving people, health literacy, equal citizenship, current great examples. That leads us nicely into the next question. Connections, places to meet. People are still typing as well.
Can I just can I make a comment? Is that all right, Claire?
Absolutely.
Like, so I think affluence is an interesting one, because actually when you look around, say, Sheffield, and look for the examples of people who are organising at a neighbourhood level, they're not in the affluent areas. The affluent areas are actually kind of closed to community largely. People live in little bubbles. That's actually one of the kind of interesting challenges here. I remember an event a few years ago, meeting one of these kind of one of these people who, students, or she'd finished being a student, she was going door to door to get money, you know, like turning up, hey, I'm here from Bernardo's or what have you. And she said that she gave up the job because it was too depressing, because she would go to poor communities, the door was answered, and people who couldn't afford to give money gave money. And she would go to wealthy communities and she wouldn't even be let through the gate. And I don't think we remember that very often, that it's ordinary people know how to take care of each other. It's hard with extreme inequality, poverty, and people breathing down your necks and punishing you in the DWP all the time. But it's not unnatural. But I think people with a lot of money kind of start to think they don't need anybody. And if they do need them, they'll just buy them. And that's I think that's quite an important difference. So I would say equality and need are quite important. But, you know, it might not be what somebody means by affluence, of course, because there's all sorts of affluence, but in the normal sense, I think it's not necessarily true.
I think you're right, Simon. I think there is, but I also think that a community needs a bit of something. I think when it's been devastated by I don't know, as you say, the benefits of poverty, when people are really struggling, then you need something. It might not be more money necessarily, and I do think people are more focused on trying to find ways to make things work for themselves and to get out of that problem. But I think there is a difficulty when you've sort of got some of the communities have been so badly affected that it's a real struggle to help them have the time and energy to do some of that organising. So there's something about it, like, you know, you talk about universal basic income, that would massively help that, or you know, a benefit system that worked for people would massively help. I'm thinking over the years at Keyring, we never used to have people referred to us who were destitute. We do now. And that's changed dramatically in the last 14 years. So I think there's we're starting at a different place often, and that's okay. You can recover from that, absolutely. But I do think there's something about not affluence, but you know, just a sufficient layer in a community to help people grow out from. And some of that is massively political, isn't it? These are decisions, political decisions that are made sometimes. The outcomes affect different groups of people differently. So I suppose that's my only observation, that I think I agree with you. Rich neighbourhoods aren't necessarily that well organised, and certainly on communities where people live closer together, there's often a lot more organised activity and people really knowing each other better. So you've got more to work with. But that experience.
The last thing I'm arguing for is poverty.
I know. It's how do you say, look, people need enough. They need enough to have a good standard of living that allows them to pay attention to their wider community as well.
And of course, one of the things that allowed for the level of community action that we saw in some neighbourhoods in COVID was furlough, which was really effectively a rather badly organised form of basic income.
Yeah.
So yeah, that time is actually one of the most important resources we have. And for the people in the UK today, contrary to government rhetoric, it's the poor who are working the hardest, with families often with parents with both working, often in multiple jobs. So they're time poor as well as financially poor. So none of that is good for neighbourhood care. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the interesting things that we've failed generally, and the we here is very broad, but we're not very good at talking about the socioeconomic conditions of good life, are we? We tend to, like in the health and social care, when people talk about addressing the socioeconomic factors, that just gets converted into, well, we just need more services in place A or place B. But actually, economic redistribution of resources is the fundamental thing we need to get right, which isn't controlled by the NHS or local government. But we kind of refuse to talk about things that are kind of above our pay grade in the way that things are currently organised, I think. So I know I completely agree with you, but I think we should do better, surely. And it's certainly one of the things Citizen Network is trying to do, at kind of showing how these issues are connected. So it isn't just okay for everybody to just keep talking about social care because that's what we're paid to do, or that's our specialism, when actually underneath that, chronic poverty is causing a lot of the problems that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simon, can I just jump in? I actually put the word affluence in there, and I think it probably was the wrong word. It wasn't so much affluent neighbourhoods, because I completely agree with you. And the example of you gave of somebody knocking on doors, I can very much kind of picture that. I actually did that job myself many years ago in Streatham in South London. But actually, I think I meant more access to resource. For that neighbourhood, I think is what I was really getting at. And it got me thinking about the something I read and I was talking to my wife about yesterday about the Sure Start programs that the Labour government put in place 15, 20 years ago or so, and that the stats now that the GCSE results demonstrate that those children are getting better results at GCSEs. But what we remembered about Sure Starts, my daughter's 15 and she got it, and my son who's 12 missed out. And we remember those community centres that were open as part of the Sure Start scheme, and they were very much neighbourhood centres where you could mix with other parents and other families. And it just struck us as an actual example, I think, of what you're talking about. But in order to help that system ferment, I guess I was getting at, you need resource to do it. There is a requirement of redistribution of that resource in order to stimulate, I think, what you're talking about. So I think that's probably what I meant, as opposed to affluent, wealthy neighbourhoods, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think physicality of space and meeting space, to me, is one of the things I think I certainly feel I haven't paid enough attention to and feels really pressing. My friends in Doncaster who established PFG, which is this amazing peer support organisation, they managed to do peer support before they had a building. But when they could take over a building, everything was like rocket fueled. because in a way people could come to them. The unexpected could come to them in a different way. And I think like digital networks and these kind of things don't have that impact. They don't have that sense of, you know, somebody comes maybe in desperate need. I mean, they've had they had a visit from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and the person from Joseph Rowntree Foundation was telling me while they were there was a local person trying to kill themselves in the road in front of the PFG building, and the folk at PFG just went and rescued this person and took care of them and found solutions with them peer to peer. And you know, the folk at JRF were kind of open-mouthed at this, but that stuff doesn't happen unless you've got a place, like, you know, unless the community has a heart, has an agora, has a space in which you can find yourself and you can find other people. Yeah, I think it's profoundly important what you're describing.
I think Kate's got a hand up.
Well, it was just because I felt really happy yesterday when I was reading about Shore Star Centres, because years ago I worked in Noel Park in North London, Haringey. I was a neighbourhood manager and my team was based in Noel Park Children's Centre, Shore Star Centre. It was just like the best times ever. And I kind of, my heart yearns to go back to those days, because there was lots of money, there was a single regeneration budget, and we were doing so many good things and all mashed up together, all eating together in the community kitchen. And it just makes me feel a bit sad. But I'm glad that they're being talked about again, because it would be nice to see that sort of thing happening in every neighbourhood.
It'd be nice to see. I don't know what our way of managing this conversation. Poor Claire's now coughing and sneezing. But I think it's interesting what you're saying as well. It would be what we didn't really do in that phase, in the kind of earlier New Labour era, though, was really tap into the idea of neighbourhood democracy. I think, the neighbourhood became a function of local government systems and government systems taking care of people.
Yeah,
right?
They had to be attached to existing local democratic systems. So we had sort of neighbourhood forums and what have you. But I think there's always this tension between local elected members and community champions. There's always a bit of a rub there.
Well,
it plays out not very nicely sometimes.
You know, what's really weird, I think, is that we have such a low bar for democracy. Like in Athens, you wouldn't elect people because you considered that's not a democracy, that's oligopoly or oligarchy. Yeah, you just selected a few people to make all the decisions, whereas democracy is about everybody making decisions. So we've not really welcomed the idea that actually everybody, like they do in southern India, everybody has a vote. Everybody should have a stake in that neighbourhood. I think that's one of the things we need to think about as well. How can these functions of neighbourhood actually be genuinely owned and controlled by the neighbourhood? And that doesn't mean through party politics. One of the things I learned when I was doing some research on the very good work that had been done in Barnsley is one of the reasons citizens won't get involved in things is because they're frightened of getting involved with party politics. They don't want to be associated with people who are saying, hey, I'm Labour or I'm Green or I'm Conservative. They see that as mad, kind of mad world. It would be stigmatising personally to be connected to. I think that's profoundly important then. If we've actually created a system that is actually stopping citizens from getting involved in their local community because they see it as being kind of wrapped up in party politics, we need to create a kind of dividing line, really. Not saying that party politics, like Philosopher Simone Weil wanted to abolish it completely, but maybe you can't abolish it completely, but you should certainly keep it out of the kind of topsoil of community life. I don't think it does any good there at all. Just turns into kind of very petty personal politics as well.
Stefan, you've got your hand up before we go into the next question.
Yeah, thank you. It might actually link the two, but just wanted to chip in, and not so much from my current role, but a couple of years ago, I helped to organise something external to CQC, which was the Supported Living Improvement Coalition. And one of the themes that the coalition wanted to explore was exactly that concept of citizenship and the equality of citizenship for people within their communities. So it's really good that we're talking about this. And Simon, it was really good that you talked about that. I think you touched almost on that sort of social model of disability versus the medical model of disability, etc. But I think in the coalition or in coalition members' minds, it was really this question of, do people even recognize themselves, or are they respected as equal citizens? You know, are they well included in their communities to be that equal citizen? Do people understand each other? You know, is there someone living next to you, for example, who has a learning disability next to you, or not? You don't understand them as a neighbor, and actually where's that bridging as well? So I think you were talking almost at a higher level of that democratic citizenship, but even that at the basic level, are people respected and recognized as equal citizens? Is such an important question to help those communities thrive, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's fundamental. I think one of the interesting things is, and I'd put it as a good example, and I don't know what other people's experiences is, it's been very tough for self-advocacy, say for people with learning disabilities, over the last 14 years. But where it's thriving, what I see are a change. And it's a bit simplistic to put it like this, but I can't think of a better way of putting it. I think self-advocates are moving from kind of asking for inclusion and citizenship to asserting their citizenship, and that they're actually increasingly leading the community change itself. And obviously that then has an impact on how they are perceived by others. I think that's the model we're in, really. We need to encourage more of that sense of, well, our communities are a bit fucked, sorry to swear, but you know, they have suffered from incredibly bad policy making and incredibly bad, wicked, I would say, I'm sorry, but wicked decision making by the powerful. Well, but then we have to do something about that, and we can do something about that, acting as citizens ourselves. Yes, we need to lobby and organise for better policy decisions, but let's not give away our capacity to just make that change now. And that's what I think is very exciting. You can see these examples emerging of people who've, in a sense, they've not just got angry, they've got organised to do good things, to make their community better, to make their lives better. And it is, for all the reasons you've all touched on, harder in many ways now. But at the same time, you can see it kind of emerging in its own way, I think. This is what this question, I suppose, is asking us to think about.
Yes, so one of the things what helps people said current great examples. So the next question being, what good examples should we be encouraging? So people are saying citizenship and contribution, community champions, 4 Greens, PFG Doncaster, as Simon spoke about, Neighbourhood ISS, Community Trust Plymouth, Community Connectors, repair shops. Does anyone want to say any more about any of the examples they've shared with us? And I guess kind of, which would lead into our next question, not to get to jump ahead, but just that it'll help us think about kind of where this network goes, because we can then invite some of these organisations or groups to come and share with us what they are doing. So does anybody want to share anything about the good examples that they have noted?
Claire, I don't know how to get it in the word thing, but I'm just thinking a great example was, obviously don't want to just talk about keyring things, but the difference we did in Newcastle taking over the lunch clubs. So the situation where older people would be transported to community centres for lunch, and working with them to completely change that and help people organise it so they go out to lunch with their friends, and you know, get there under all sorts of different ways, not in a minibus necessarily, but really thinking about what do you actually want to do. You want to go out, you want to meet people, where do you want to go, you could go to a different place every week if you wanted to, because you'd be organising it with a group of other people and doing that in a very local way. And that's worked very positively. And that there was a group of people who needed more accessible transport and such like in order to go for lunch. And so it was, well, we're not going to say, well, that's that, you're stuck in the community centre. It was about working and looking and finding a local pub with accessible toilets, etc., who opened up their big dining room, and it was for everybody, you know, because they knew they were going to have a certain number of people come in, and then they could open up so that the whole community could use that space. So it wasn't a segregated spot, but that was just a really unpicking an old-fashioned idea, which was fine. People got fed and they met other people, but taking it to the next step. And I don't know how you can get in that examples. What we should be encouraging is think beyond, or what do people actually want? Because generally people don't want services. What they want is to get a life and get back on their feet in some way, and to not feel so lonely. But they don't need a service for it. It's about helping people pick through that. So people like local area coordinators are great at that. And I don't know, community development, if there's ever any community development workers still alive around, that makes a difference. All of those little things I see time and time again, just thinking, oh, why are we doing it like this? Can't we do it differently?
Yeah.
And PFG Doncaster's, you know, great example of people rethinking things. But you don't have to have your own venue. We don't. We snuggle up to whoever else is in the community and join forces with them, and that seems to work as well.
Karen, we've got Fiona. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just to say about I think I wrote the words wrong on it, but Four Greens Community Trust in Plymouth, and they do some fantastic work, and they've got a team of community connectors that work across the city and into neighbourhoods to connect people. So there's loads of work that they're doing to you, and if you could I can give you the contact for them. They're brilliant.
Thanks for that. Yeah, the one for the future meeting. Kate.
It's slightly what it occurred to me for the last two slides, and I'm really keen to hear Simon's brief thoughts on this. Is we haven't mentioned churches or faith or places where people come together with a shared faith. And I come from a place where I've always separated out, and I think this has been working in London, where it was always very important. We never met, we saw places like churches and other buildings around faith as not inclusive, and so we turned our back on them as places to meet or to hold neighbourhood meetings or whatever. And they weren't allowed to, I don't think they were allowed to grant funding because it wasn't seen as inclusive. So I'm wondering what we think the role of faith is in communities these days.
Well, I don't know. It's a very interesting example, isn't it? Where, you know, so, well, just declare an interest. So I am a Christian, so I tend to view these things through that lens. And, but I've been quite nervous about the way the church has responded to austerity in a way, because it's almost got overexcited by its ability to act as the hub of charitable action. And so I've been writing and lobbying around why the church should support basic income, why the way we think about, you know, what's wrong with food banks. So I'm not sure I worry so much about exclusion. I mean, in a sense, all forms of identity are a basis for connection. And I'm not quite sure why faith like that, that's like excluding. It's like, well, we're not going to deal with those artists because they only care about art. And actually, in my actual experience, people of faith typically are rather inclusive. Many churches and other groups, Islamic groups and many other groups, are quite welcoming of people of many different faiths. It's quite interesting. This is an example not really about church, but about PFG. PFG is primarily made up of kind of ordinary folk from Doncaster, but groups emerge like an LGBTQ plus group because one of the members of the group, that's their passion, they want to bring people together. But another group emerges is the Muslim ladies group, Muslim women who are feeling isolated and alone. Those groups coexist within, contrary to many people's stereotypes, within the PFG family and are very good allies to each other. And I think that sometimes what goes on is people just apply their own lazy prejudices and assume that, you know, oh, well, they're like that, aren't they? Because perhaps they've met some really annoying evangelical Christians on a day, on one day. But, you know, I think that, yeah, I would just say we've got to be kind of open to the way community gets constructed. I think, like, to go back to the Sure Start example, that's tension for me is, and I wonder what will happen as we go into this next phase of policy making. Curiously, the new Labour group are talking about some of the things we've been talking about today. So at least at the level of rhetoric, I would expect to see policymakers talk about these things increasingly. And after the general election, and they've been talking about community power and a Community Power Act for a while, and all sorts of things like this. But historically, what we tended to see both Labour and Tory do is to decide what's best for people and then impose it on people. And the more fundamental issue for me is this kind of like, can we actually enable people to craft solutions? Because the capacity is in the ground, in the people, in the communities. It isn't in whatever idea attached to whatever budget is going to be dropped from the skies onto those communities. I think that's and for me, what I've been learning about over the last few years is the power of regenerative thinking and regenerative farming, where you understand that actually what damages the soil is the stuff we chuck at it, whether that be pesticides, whether that be poisons, and a kind of monoculture damages, only planting one thing. Well, if you applied that to social care, you'd see, well, we've been doing kind of agricultural scale farming of communities. That's our model, is that kind of industrial model. We know best, we're going to do this to you, it's for your own good, shut up. And we have to reverse that. And that's not easy, but I think that's the new wave of thinking, really. And I think faith has a place in that. It shouldn't dominate. There are many people, great people, who have no faith at all. But I think to shut it down would be weird. Yeah. Sorry, long answer to a good question.
We've got Zoe with a hand up.
Hello. Yeah, it was just to kind of expand on what Simon was saying around obviously the religious services, and I've recently done some engagement with BAME specific day services and did some engagement with the citizens there, and the BAME specific services within Nottingham City are very quite underutilised. So we have, I think, 3 or 4 services, and probably maximum of 10 people attend these day services for their specific culture. And when we go, like when we went and we asked the question of, okay, so if this wasn't open, where else would you go? And there was like, well, there wouldn't be anywhere else, because if we went to just a normal generic day service, then they wouldn't meet our needs. But on the flip side of that is, because I used to be a registered manager, so if somebody has a care and support plan, it tells them what their needs are, and this is how this person eats, and this is how they have to wash their hands, and this is the routines that they have to do, then the care provider, the day service provider, would do that. They would be inclusive, and it could be a centre for everybody, as just opposed to have kind of like separate centres and then other centres for people who don't have those kind of needs. So there does feel like a lack of willingness to integrate from those services into the more inclusive generic services. And while they are great, and like these BAME specific services are very, very good, and they are very specific to where these people come from, they are underutilised. So as we all know, the local authorities and finances, and especially Nottingham City at the minute within the news and things, like we can't have services that are underutilised. So how do we move forward from that whilst still listening to what their needs are and their wants are, but by also being very realistic in the world that we are in? You don't necessarily want to take something away and then that's it, but it is very, like, within care and support, you can be inclusive, you can meet these people's needs in a different setting. So it's just trying to understand. I don't know, Simon kind of went off on a different tangent and then I forgot where I was going, so it was just, yeah.
I think in the helps, I think somebody had commented about kind of using ISFs, and I guess in that scenario, you know, there's opportunity for those people to take their personal budget, or if they're self-funding, to kind of then take that money and then spend it in other ways, you know. So it's very bespoke to each person, and it's not necessarily going to kind of the centre that's the venue, but then just kind of getting involved with kind of community life. So if somebody, like Karen was talking about, if somebody was wanting to go out for, you know, is going out for lunch or wanting to do a particular activity, they would look for having some support, or having some somebody go, you know, using the ISF to access those things in the community that are just universal groups
which
and
is
activities.
And we do try and promote kind of like direct payments, ISFs and things like that, but I think, and this is a very generic statement, so I don't want people to judge me, it's not something that I know like properly, but there seems to be a lack of willingness to use direct payments in the older people section. They don't necessarily want to manage that. So then obviously we are looking at other ways to support them and have the access to like the communities and the community connectors and things like that. But how do you get past the not wanting to use because you can't make the music, can you?
Zoe, is that really because this is a fundamental flaw, isn't it? What we've done is push direct payments. We haven't created, the whole point of an ISF is not to burden people with employing staff and all of the complexities that come with that. But we keep pushing direct payments and forgetting that there's a completely different model. And interestingly, I think I agree with Claire, and just to add to that, really, those organizations that are maybe led by people from particular communities that want to kind of think about what their role is, one future for them would be to manage ISFs, to construct solutions with people, but to think about solutions that really work for people, both as maybe their identity, maybe there's only a way of, I don't know, maybe the group is so small that the only way of connecting in relation to your ethnicity puts you on a different footprint to your neighbourhood, right? But they're still in that neighbourhood, and as PFG's shown, like the people in that neighbourhood benefit from learning about other cultures and communities that are represented in their neighbourhood. There are other ways of telling this story. Like what you see in PFG is people go, like, I mean, I'm sure that many people have never asked, but, you know, just the normal prejudices against Muslims probably existed for many white working class folk in PFG in the way that they seem to sadly exist across our society. But when they meet and they learn about different ways of cooking, different religious practices, they understand what people do and don't do and go, oh, that's interesting, that's not important to me, but I understand it's important to you. That's incredibly valuable itself. So I think that one of the ways I think about this is what we've got to move away is, well, not move away from. There are many groups that exist, I would say, they've been organised around a horizontal identity, not the neighbourhood, but something else. And actually the system over years has encouraged this. So this has led to groups, in a sense, often that start in neighbourhoods, floating away from their neighbourhood. And the challenge is, in a way, to start getting there, not to kind of go, oh, well, you've got it all wrong. I mean, it's to say, well, how could you relate differently to neighbourhoods? We need your skills. We need your gifts. I mean, talking to those groups themselves, they're real people that you've spent years investing in. How could you do that, but in a way that also enabled people to be a citizen at a neighbourhood level, that also meant that your ethnicity turned up at a neighbourhood level, that other citizens learned about you at a neighbourhood level, because everybody you support through your horizontal identity also lives somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think we have to kind of own that a bit more, that's an important dimension of life, because neighborhoods are part of the earth, and in a way we won't take care of the world if we don't take care of our neighborhoods, and it takes neighbors to do that. So we can't have everybody floating, like we can't have the rich floating off into their bubbles, always on holiday, and the poor in like working full time, no time to do anything in the neighborhood, because what gets left behind, not only is that really bad for people, but it's actually really bad for the place, because there's nobody thinking about the place, the relationships. So I just kind of maybe approach it in a different direction, really. Not say you've got it wrong, because actually it's the local authority that set that system up. So if anybody got it wrong, it's the local authority. It's like, how do we work together to bring your skills, values, religious beliefs, or ethnic practices or culture into place? Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you.
I'm just conscious of time. We are due to finish at past, and Sarah's been waiting ever so patiently with a hand up. So Sarah, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge, I also worked on the Sure Start scheme back in the day, and what a good scheme it was. And we endorsed it, are currently working on the development of hubs and spokes. The main barrier that I find is we've got the government, the Department of Health, supporting the children's services and the development of family hubs that only go up to the age of 25. So when we're trying to develop neighbourhoods and communities, why are we not supporting a hub that's 0 to infinity? Why would we segregate young people? Because as a local authority, we're being supported to do that by government, where it absolutely goes against the grain of what we're trying to do when we're trying to develop a neighbourhood and community footing. So really it's just a comment about, you know, we're not, on one hand we're asked to support change and make things inclusive and develop our neighbourhoods, but on the other hand that's not supported by some of the government grants and funding arrangements.
Aaron's coming with a comment there saying, why do we segregate people in any way? It's a form of rationing.
Absolutely.
What one thing I'd say, Sarah, is, I mean, maybe you never do, and I don't think this is the point you're making, but a long time ago, I abandoned, after a painful experience of spending half my life going to the Department of Health, expecting rational policy making from government. So, you know, yeah, first of all, one just has to kind of accept that. But the certainly in South Yorkshire at the moment, I'm talking to all the kind of senior health and local authority leads on this theme, and they are supporting the idea of developing a regional strategy for neighbourhood care. And one of the reasons we're doing that is we want to get ahead of the policy making process and push for the changes we want. And that's something maybe leaders in Dorset could team up with us on. You know, in a way, this is what we did with personal budgets originally in 2003. It wasn't government policy. Personal budgets was the opposite of government policy. I was going to the department and they're saying, oh no, we want bigger contracts, regional contracts. We don't want individual funding. What's that all about? And so we had to work very hard to defeat the position that was adopted by the Department of Health at that point. And I think this might be the same, you know, Central government doesn't want to give up power. That's not, it's not natural to the way it functions. So local leaders have to think about teaming up to develop a new policy picture, I would say.
The one thing I would say, and I absolutely agree with you, but what tends to happen, and I'm sure you're aware, is the Department of Health put time constraints on the expenditure of that money, so you don't have the ability to be able to form those coalitions and sit down and say, well, actually, you know, we could create a wider hub arrangement, because the money's got to be spent so quickly in developing those the family hubs in Dorset, and it must be the same across the rest of the country, that, you know, the horse is already bolted, if you like.
Yeah, I think you just have to start by factoring in the stupidity of central government policy making, and then work out what you will do to compensate for that. I'm afraid it's just I've just lost too much of my life expecting it, so I don't do that anymore. So that's all I can say. I don't think it's like, work with the good people you can find at that level, but don't expect it to be consistent, coherent, logical, or good.
Thank you. At least that you make me feel as if I'm not the only person in the world that's feels like I'm fighting against the tide. But thank you for that, Simon.
I think there's been so much discussion with kind of overrun in terms of not overrunning time just quite yet, but in terms of kind of we wanted to spend a bit more time just talking about what are the aspirations for the network. What would you like to hear more about? What would you like to explore further? So you've put lots of comments in the Slido. So if we share kind of the feedback that you've given us, then maybe for the next session we kind of spend some time exploring a bit more about what we want for the network, but maybe the great examples that you said were happening, kind of that you know of. Maybe I could send around a poll, and maybe we can try and invite somebody then to come to the next meeting or some of the meetings down the line, just so that we've got a sense of who you do want to hear more from. And I think there was some of the things in that last bit around, you know, how do you get going? How, you know, what money? How do you get funding to start something? How do you challenge things? And I guess if we hear from people who are already kind of doing things locally, then they'll be answering some of those questions for us as well, and there can be a bit more of a discussion. Does that sound okay for people, that we're bringing it to a really kind of hasty conclusion, but we will send some kind of the feedback, maybe a couple more polls saying what's your preferences? Let's see if we can get people to come to the next network sessions, and some ideas for an agenda for next time. Is that okay? Yeah, it's been great to see everybody. It's been a really great turnout, and thanks so much for everybody's kind of like involvement and discussion for the first meeting. It's been brilliant. The next meeting is the 5th of May. Sorry, 5th of June. That would be really short notice, wouldn't it? The 5th of June is the next meeting. I don't know, Chris, have you sent the invite out for that, or will that come out?
I'm going to have a review of that because we've had some technical issues today with people getting into the room and stuff. So
okay, so the next date's the 5th of June as it stands, 9 till 10:30. We'll sort out some invites as well, and we will be in touch. And for anybody who the ISS Zoe is saying she'd like to find out more, Chris and I are happy to speak to people. If anybody else would like to do the same, I think we'd be both happy to chat with people from kind of his self-directed futures perspective, me as a provider perspective, if that would be useful. So thanks so much. We've overrun by 2 minutes. Don't think we did bad, seeing that it was the first meeting. So lovely to see you all, and have a great day. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Claire's still there. That's Claire left the room. The other, oh no.
I was just trying to get rid of her in a nice way.
Well done. Is that okay for you? I'm sorry, I did kind of like, there's a lot to talk about, isn't there?
There is, and I guess I mean, you've obviously got lots and lots of knowledge, and people want to kind of really kind of pick your brains about stuff and that. And sometimes I think kind of when you're trying to then like kind of who's this, who's that, trying to then kind of coordinate stuff, I'm like, is this okay? So, but if, you know, hopefully you thought that was okay. And I guess, you know, it was better that people are raising questions, isn't it? You know, asking stuff and sharing things rather than people saying nothing.
Absolutely.
And it's just us doing all the talking, or you rather doing a lot of the talking. So yeah, I think there's probably stuff that there's to go at, isn't there? in terms of what they might like to see for future meetings. So yeah, so I think if we kind of send something out based on the notes that people have popped up there in the slide, maybe people can vote on kind of what they, you know, but and we can just then work them over the coming year, can't we, with some examples of what's happening in different areas.
And I mean, it'd be good to I think good to put keyring on the map earlier in this, because keyring has so much, I mean, on many different levels. This is also relevant to you. So I think, and I think we're not really talked about this this South Yorkshire thing much, have we, either? Which is, I'm not saying that would be something we do in this meeting, but it'd be good to have a conversation about what's going on in South Yorkshire and what could go on and what opportunities that might create for keyring as well at some point.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Yeah. I guess the keyring, I think, I guess it's really hard, isn't it? You don't need to keep blowing your own trumpet. We're very bad at blowing our own trumpet and stuff. And it's like, so you don't want to I don't want to force myself on people or force keyring on people, but then, like you say, there's lots of examples of where things just work really, you know, naturally and stuff, all that, you know. Sarah's talking about hubs, and, you know, hubs are very much part of kind of our offer, and they're added value to the contract stuff, really. We try and get, you know, additional funding in, or we try and establish hubs that anyone can drop into, rather than it just being for keyring members and stuff. And some local authorities absolutely see the value in that, and then some are kind of like, you know, no, you know, it's just you go and see somebody in the home and that's it, and you're like, right, well, we're not interested then, you know. So but yeah, I'll pick up with Chris around the Slido feedback.
Yeah, well, my feedback is like, okay, I understand why you would be a bit nervous, but in the end, there's a reason why you're in this. And so actually kind of mapping out some of the developments, I think, and recording that and sharing that afterwards to promote keyring model is actually really useful. And we can also, you know, spot the other people we want to go and chase up or bring in, but I don't think you should be too shy. That would be my request anyway. I think it'd be, you know, whether we do that, I think would be quite appropriate to set that in June or very soon anyway, because I think, people will just not, people might take for granted, them either just not even know the basics, or just kind of make up their own version of what it is you've been doing. But you've been learning about this for a long time.
Yeah, and you're right. You know, there's still, even after 33 years, there are still people who either don't know about keyring, or, you know, think about keyring from 33 years ago, where, you know, we were supporting people with a learning disability, and that's it, you know, kind of thing. And it's a very kind of narrow view of what we do, and we just, you know, it's evolved, like we say, over the 33 years. So, okie doke. Right.
All right.
Yes, lovely. Thanks for that. Great session.
No, thank you.
That's
great to have you there.
Thank
holding
you.
it together.
Right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.